There's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't roar, doesn't rage, doesn't demand to be seen. It's the strength of the woman who's been shattered by heartbreak, by betrayal, by disappointment, by a world that never made space for her grief. She doesn't cry out for help, not because she doesn't need it, but because somewhere along the way she learned that no one's coming to save her. And so, with trembling hands, she starts to gather the pieces of herself. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because she knows she has to. Because lying in the rubble is not where her story ends. Rebuilding yourself alone is one of the most brutal kinds of courage. It's waking up with a weight on your chest and still choosing to get out of bed. It's cooking dinner for one, sitting with your silence, and learning not to run from it. It's taking accountability for your healing, even when the hurt wasn't your fault. It's refusing to let bitterness make a home in your heart. There is no manual for this. No one hands you a map when you're standing at the edge of what used to be your life. You become the architect, you become the builder, and you do it all while still bleeding from the wounds. But here's the secret. Healing alone doesn't mean being lonely. It means discovering your own depth. It means looking in the mirror not to fix your flaws, but to recognize your resilience. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone is not hard. She is not cold. She is soft in places no one will ever see. She cries, yes, but she also laughs louder now, because she knows what it means to lose herself and fight her way back. She's learned that her worth was never dependent on who stayed or who left. It was never tied to being chosen. It was always within her. And maybe she doesn't trust so easily anymore. Maybe she's a little more protective of her peace. But it's not because she's afraid. It's because she's worked too hard to get back to herself to let anyone undo that. She's no longer asking for permission to feel, to speak, to be. She's not shrinking herself for comfort. She's not apologizing for outgrowing the versions of herself that were built on survival. She's here, raw and real, and she knows the difference now between those who love her soul and those who only loved her scars. The strong woman who rebuilds herself alone isn't invincible. She's real. She's human. And that's where her power lives. Not in being untouched by pain, but in walking through it and choosing to live fully anyway. Because she knows the truth. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering who you were before the world taught you to hide. It means finally becoming who you were always meant to be. There comes a moment in a woman's life when she realizes that no one is coming to save her. Not because people don't love her, but because healing was never someone else's responsibility. It's in that sacred, terrifying moment when she's sitting alone with her pain, her disappointment, and the echo of people who left, that she begins to understand something most people never teach you. You have to become your own sanctuary. For most of her life, she may have poured herself into others. She was the safe place for everyone else, always available, always comforting, always showing up. But when she needed it most, when her world was falling apart, she looked around and found silence. Not because she was unloved, but because people assumed she was strong enough. Because they believed she'd figure it out. And so she did. Not out of pride, but out of survival. She began to sit with herself, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. At first, it was uncomfortable, like walking into an unfamiliar home. Her own thoughts felt like strangers, her emotions too loud, the silence deafening. But she stayed. She stayed through the loneliness, through the temptation to distract herself, through the ache of unmet needs. And in that staying, she discovered something profound. She could hold herself. She learned to be her own soft landing. She cried into her own hands and whispered, "It's okay. I've got you now." She made space for every broken part of herself, not to fix them, but to acknowledge that they mattered. She stopped looking outside for someone to soothe her wounds and instead began to tend to them with her own care. Slowly, she stopped abandoning herself in the moments she felt most unloved. Being your own safe place doesn't mean you don't want love. It doesn't mean you don't long for support or companionship or the comfort of someone else's arms. It means that you don't rely on them to complete you. You no longer need another person's presence to validate your worth. You've built something stronger, an inner home that holds you steady when the world around you falls apart. She learned to wrap herself in blankets on cold nights without resentment. She lit candles not to impress anyone, but because she deserved softness. She played her favorite music, danced barefoot in her kitchen, and laughed, not to prove she was okay, but because in those quiet moments she really was. She made peace with the fact that not everyone will understand her journey, and that's okay. They don't have to. It's hers. She started making decisions that aligned with her peace rather than her fear. She stopped betraying herself to be liked. She stopped saying yes when her body screamed no. She stopped shrinking for love that didn't know how to hold her bigness. And she realized, perhaps for the first time, that safety wasn't in someone else's arms. It was in her own courage to choose herself. This doesn't mean she never breaks down anymore. It means that when she does, she no longer sees it as a sign of weakness. She sees it as truth, as humanity, as the most sacred kind of strength. Because now, when the world goes quiet and the chaos creeps in, she no longer runs. She simply places a hand over her heart and reminds herself, "You're safe here with me." There's a kind of grief that doesn't scream. It just sits in your chest like a quiet weight, showing up in the smallest moments. When she's brushing her hair, driving alone, or hearing a song that used to mean something. And for a long time, she didn't know what to do with that grief. She tried to silence it. She smiled when it hurt. She kept moving forward, thinking maybe if she stayed busy enough, it wouldn't follow her, but it always did. There's this unspoken pressure placed on women to be unbreakable, to be the ones who hold it all together, to be okay for everyone else. And so she wore the mask. She showed up at work. She answered the texts. She kept the house clean. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. Not because she was weak, but because no one taught her how to sit with her own pain without being consumed by it. Until one day she stopped pretending, not out of defeat, but out of love for herself. She stopped numbing, stopped minimizing, stopped explaining away her heartache. She let it in. All of it. The betrayal, the abandonment, the things she never got to say, the dreams that didn't unfold the way she imagined. She let herself feel it, deeply, honestly, without shame. And that was the turning point, because healing doesn't happen through denial. It begins in truth. She learned that honoring her pain didn't mean she was broken. It meant she was human. And being human is messy and tender and full of contradictions. Some days she still misses people who hurt her. Some days she feels anger toward people she once loved. Some days she feels nothing at all. And that scared her too. But instead of judging it, she began to listen. Her emotions became signals, not enemies. They became invitations to go deeper, not warnings to shut down. She started writing in journals that no one would ever read, not to make sense of everything, but to simply release it. She cried in the shower where the water could hide her tears. She screamed into pillows. She laughed at memories that hurt. And in doing so, she gave her pain a place to breathe. She gave herself permission to feel without needing to fix. But here's what made her powerful. She never let the pain define her. She didn't wear it like an identity. She didn't turn it into a wall between her and the world. She allowed it to pass through her like a storm that doesn't ask for permission. And when the storm passed, because it always does, she realized she was still standing. Different, yes. Softer in some places, tougher in others, but still here. She understood that healing isn't about being untouched by sorrow. It's about not losing yourself in it. It's about holding your grief in one hand and your hope in the other. And on the days it all felt too heavy, she didn't collapse. She rested, she paused, she whispered to herself, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore. You have you now." She gave herself grace. She stopped apologizing for her feelings. She no longer asked herself to get over it on a timeline that made others comfortable. And she began to rebuild, not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of reverence for all the versions of herself that survived what she thought would break her. And that is how she became whole again, not by erasing her pain, but by finally making space for it, not by becoming her wounds, but by choosing to grow around them, through them, beyond them. For the longest time, she thought being strong meant being silent. It meant holding back tears in public and smiling when her soul was aching. It meant saying, "I'm fine," even when she was barely holding herself together. She thought strength was about armor, thick skin, closed doors, and pretending like nothing could touch her. Because somewhere along the way, she was taught that vulnerability was weakness, that softness made you fragile, that showing your heart was an invitation to be hurt. But the truth, that version of strength almost broke her. It kept her isolated. It kept her in relationships where she was praised for being low maintenance, for not having needs, for never asking too much. It made her believe she had to be the cool one, the understanding one, the one who swallowed her feelings just to keep the peace. She